Hello again, dear students. In this second video, we will continue discussing the short story Charles written by Shirley Jackson, and we will shed light on the psychological aspects in the story as well as her style of writing. As writing autobiographical story, Jackson referred again to her life by representing her own child in Laurie's figure. And here I wish to emphasize upon the bulk of theories which appeared at the post-war era and beyond, and that studied the child development. One of the most famous psychiatrists of the 20th century was Margaret Mohler. Margaret Mohler, who was a Hungarian psychiatrist, described the first stages occurring in the first 3 years of life. She worked on the attachment theory and was mainly interested in the personality disorders and the ego psychology, a concept which evolved from the Freudian thought. So Mohler here didn't really work on novel theory, but she only tried to broaden the scope of the existing theories by focusing mainly on the mother-infant interaction and interrelation as being the primary caregiver. In her attachment theory, Mohler focused on the idea of the rapprochement phase and spoke about the child's first encounter and his first social development with his mother. Mohler explained that the relationship between the mother and child is significant as it denotes how can a child socially develop when related to his mother and be able to separate from her later. As the child differentiates from his mother's body at 6 months, he will feel a stranger anxiety because he starts to differentiate from the only human being he trusts and looks elsewhere for another object to whom he needs to successfully identify. Separation refers to the mental separation of the mother, while individuation refers to a developing self-concept. In Laurie's case here, we can see clearly how could he successfully detach himself from his mother, both mentally and physically. And she denotes this in her account of her first day in kindergarten as follows. The day my son Laurie started kindergarten, he renounced corduroy overalls with bibs and began wearing blue jeans with a belt. I watched him go off the first morning with the older girl next door, seeing clearly that an era of my life was ended. My sweet-voiced nursery school tot replaced by a long-trousered, swaggering character who forgot to stop at the corner and wave goodbye to me. On this basis, we see that Laurie manages to get through those two stages effectively. He could separate himself from his mother and individualize himself as a grown-up. The idea of successful navigation of the rapprochement phase could be determined by a reference to the child's ability to either accept or reject an object and also exchange it for another, because it can no longer provide satisfaction. Margaret Mohler argued that if a child could achieve rapprochement, where he or she is able to separate from whom they trust and go back when needed, they show their mental health. But if they cannot either separate or attach, this is evidence and a symptom of their illness, because psychiatrists and psychoanalysts claim that a child has an innate capacity towards self-development with the social world. As the mother is represented as his primary relationship, she is to determine his or her relation with the outer world to be either positive or negative. And unfortunately for Laurie, he fails to break through his shock of separation and individuation. It appears at first that he has managed to perfectly detach himself from his mother, but not toward another human being, but toward himself, uh, because he couldn't find satisfaction neither in his mother's body or his teacher's character. And the attachment theory in his case and his poor behavior show that his separation and individuation collapsed when he denies his teacher, uh, who is supposedly representing the mother-like figure and a reflection to a loving and a caring female with whom he could find solace, affection, and comfort. He cannot find relief in his teacher's figure, the only female who can be trusted and appreciated after his mother. So Laurie here revenges his separation from his mother by torturing and retaliating from his teacher. And instead of filling in his emotional and psychological void or gap with obeying his teacher and learning from her, he chooses to forge the relationship with himself and imprison himself in his own prison cell of anger, violence, and guilt. Laurie obeys his other self and creates an alter ego for himself. Laurie's first personality development and encounter after detaching from his mother is with Charles, some misbehaved child whose poor behavior is always reported in the house. Although being really concerned about this Charles, Laurie's parents didn't really try to reorient him or correct him. When the mother shows concern about her child's behavior in the house and the way Charles was really uh, affecting him badly, the father tried to comfort her as follows. On Saturday, I remarked to my husband, "Do you think that kindergarten is too unsettling for Laurie? All this toughness and bad grammar, and this Charles boy sounds like such a bad influence." "It'll be all right," my husband said reassuringly. "Bound to the people like Charles in the world. Might as well meet them now as later." Here we see that the father misses the point. He believes that secondary development in school and the hidden curriculum which is taught in the culture and the behavior of the peers is all supposed to take place in one's life. He neglects this and thinks that school is meant to be the ground where a child constructs his personality. And Laurie here is able of distinguishing the right from wrong. So he will be able to detach himself from Charles' behavior. Because the way Laurie reports Charles' actions doesn't really tell us much about his opinions about him. Laurie speaks using the third person singular he or the plural they by excluding himself from the scene and marks himself to be a viewer only. Uh, a well-behaved boy who is just reporting the everyday school routine at the lunch table. By way of contrast, both parents should have paid attention to their child, because detaching from his mother towards an alter ego caused his personality disorder, or say, caused him a dissociative personality disorder. And he grows in this context, he grows a schizophrenic character that tends to show itself in school and hides inside the home, denying his parents' teachings outside by showing an opposing attitude via society in general and via his parents in particular. Laurie's behavior shows his love towards himself as he feels proud of his actions. He develops an alter ego as being an other side of personality, the other that people cannot see, an other which is opposite but represents a twinship where attachment and identification take place. And here, the ill person becomes enslaved as a subject to this other. So the narcissistic character that is concerned with self-love and the studies of the borderline personality disorder, which is also known as the unstable personality disorder, characterized by a long-term pattern of unstable relationships, a distorted, deformed, misshaped sense of self, and strong emotional reactions, could lead to self-harm and other dangerous behaviors. So oral aggression, for example, in the story, is a sign of Charles or Laurie's case here, or situation. The alter ego, or the unstable personality disorder, split all good from all bad images of the self and of their object relationships. The child here creates a loving and hateful attitude towards the self and towards the significant others, similar to his mother, his father, his teacher, and friends. So, splitting is a major defensive mechanism and operation of the ego. When the father asks about the physical appearance of Charles in the story by wondering the following: what does this Charles look like? Laurie answers back by, he is bigger than me. So the father didn't really ask about the personality, as it is already mingled with their child's behavior in the way he acts and the way he reacts in school or in the house. But rather, he asks another significant question: what's his other name? Here we see that the double character of Laurie pumps up from time to time, and the writer here shows us that this Laurie character has another alter ego that is controlling him and force him to react poorly. Oral aggression is also significant in the story, especially when the way the mother tell us about the attitude of her child when first returning from kindergarten as follows: he came home the same way, the front door slamming open, his cap on the floor, and the voice suddenly became raucous, shouting, "Isn't anybody here?" At lunch he spoke insolently to his father, spilled his baby sister's milk, and remarked that his teacher said we were not to take the name of the Lord in vain. As writing a semi-biographical domestic comedy, Jackson shows us an angle of culture and child raising by having a cultural reference to religion, which is thou shalt not take the name of God your Lord in vain. Washing one's mouth with soap in the story is actually a way to punish children when swearing or misbehaving or committing misdeeds. In modern American literature, a book by St. James Press from 1999, Laurie is described as an imp or an inferior devil, malevolent, supernatural, but smaller and less powerful human being, and also as a naughty, harmful, as well as mischievous child. Shirley Jackson's style of writing reflects the World War II's psychological conditions and atmosphere. She is known to represent humorous stories which are based on realism, with a mixture of the macabre and the terrifying and the familiar. and the combination of the childlike and cruelty as a standard theme. She sees life in her own style as devastating. There is always an illusion in the way she leads her readers to the precise point at which the crucial shock can be administered. Shirley Jackson's stories fall into three categories. The third category is the one that we are concerned with in this story, and which is a fantasy ranging from humorous whimsy to horrifying shock. We start the story by the mother who is describing the first experience of her child in kindergarten. Then it transforms suddenly into having a child maybe hallucinating or lying about another bad child in school. And we finish the story by a shocking experience when discovering that the same misbehaved child is Laurie himself. Here, the method of Shirley Jackson is to establish with meticulous detail, concretely realistic setting, and then to allow the story to crumble into unreality, where Laurie is finally identified as Chance by the end of the story, and as having a new character that hides itself beyond the real Laurie, as an alter ego who takes the blame about what role to fulfill. Jackson begins deceptively describing a realistic story of the ordinary American small town life and develops gradually into a horrifying tale of detachment or mental disorders. In Charles as a short story, the tale starts by describing an everyday life of a couple who is raising children and watching them grow, but it suddenly transforms in Charles as a story. The tale starts by describing the everyday life of an everyday life. In Charles as a story, Jackson's style is always marked by having a veneer or an attractive appearance of the commonplace, where true nature and feelings are disguised with apparent goodness. The cruel and evil are covered and overlaid by the decorative commonplace or the ordinary things. But the final impression is that even this surface shines not with polish but with colorful or the iridescence of decay. And even if the commonplace is fantastic, nothing is right or in place. Jackson was influenced by the American Gothic of Edgar Allan Poe, Henry James, and Nathaniel Hawthorne. And if you are not familiar with these names, please I ask you to go and check uh, who those storytellers and writers were. And she focuses on the problem of women and concerns herself with the traditional home, making occupation women of the mid 20th century feminist movement who became unsatisfied. Jackson used fictional town with fictional plots to refer to a realistic situation in real life. She uses repetition and she doesn't write about the supernatural as an end in itself, only its psychological manifestations. No ghosts, just harmed minds. The elements in the story, similar to point of view, which is the perspective and the angle from which this story is told, is defined and employed through Laurie's mother, who tells us the story as being a protagonist or a character acting in the story, and she is the one who gave us access to Laurie's behavior, thoughts, and emotions, along with the other characters and the happenings that takes place in the story. As a conclusion, we say that the main character, Laurie, is the portrayal of the traumatic experience after the Second World War, and the representation of the new generation of American society who survived the war along or without their parents. So here we come to diagnose the American domestic life and its social development after the war by linking this to the author's setting in the story by reference to both time and the physical location where the story takes place, as well as the social circumstances that are surfaced in the 1940s family relationships, as well as social and human behaviors. Laurie is Jackson's response to war by characterizing him as a deformed and mentally unstable character who is transformed from being a lovely tot into becoming an ill, misshaped, and psychologically tormented self. Laurie is but the likeness of American society who was really suffering wounds and injuries on the inside but polished with prosperity on the outside. He embodies how America has lost innocence and was forced to suddenly mature to face the cruelty of the world. So his misbehavior is but a detachment from the land itself and a rebellion against the rules and teachings of society that were only created to try and mend what was broken. And this is all for now. I hope you find this useful, and I'll see you in another video soon.